Marvel is always searching for the next great villain, the threat meant to define a new era. Fresh faces introduced with hype, dangerous powers, and storylines built to make them unforgettable. But instead of rising into legendary status, many collapsed almost instantly. Weak writing, poor timing, and constant resets killed their momentum before it even began. These weren't minor enemies. They were supposed to be the future of Marvel's rogues gallery. So, which next-gen villains did Marvel fail to launch, and why didn't they stick? Here are 10 villains that never became the icons they were meant to be. At number 10 is Romulus, the true mastermind behind Wolverine. Introduced in Wolverine issue 55 in 2007 by Jeff Loeb and Simone Bianchi, Romulus was positioned as the definitive answer to Logan's mysterious past. First appearing fully in issue 55, Romulus tried to claim Wolverine wasn't a mutant, but a member of a subspecies called Lupus sapiens. Marvel revealed him as an ancient, feral immortal who had orchestrated every tragedy in Wolverine's life, including the infamous Weapon X program, for centuries. Designed as the apex predator, he resembled an oversized saber-tooth and easily dominated Logan physically, supposedly ruling human history since the Roman Empire. However, the launch failed spectacularly. Readers rejected the retcon that Wolverine lacked agency, finding the idea that one villain wrote Logan's history cheap rather than epic. Fans widely ridiculed his visual design, particularly his impractically long fingernails and the clumsy Lupus sapiens pseudoscience origin. After his initial arc, he was largely ignored until a brief 2012 return saw him unceremoniously dumped into the microverse. Ultimately, Romulus failed due to structural over-explanation. By tying everything in Logan's life to a single mastermind, Marvel shrank the very mystery that made Wolverine iconic. At number 9 is the Neo, the replacement for mutants. Created by Chris Claremont in X-Men issue 100 in 2000, the Neo were introduced as a super-evolved subspecies, beings who were, to mutants, what mutants are to humans. Marvel intended them to be the primary threat for a new era, forcing the X-Men back into the underdog role. They were elevated through a massive society of distinct clans, such as the War Clan, with power levels that humiliated the X-Men in their debut. However, readers rejected the concept immediately. The lore was convoluted, introducing too many characters at once, and felt like 90s excess just as the franchise was shifting toward a grounded aesthetic. They vanished when Grant Morrison took over, and years later, the entire species was unceremoniously wiped out off-panel to tidy up continuity. Ultimately, the Neo failed due to structural redundancy. With the X-Men already struggling for survival against humanity, introducing a super mutant race to make them obsolete created a layer of conflict that fans simply didn't accept. At number 8 is Lash, the face of the Inhuman push. Created by Charles Soule and Joe Madureira in Inhuman issue 1 in 2014, Lash was the spearhead of Marvel's controversial corporate push to replace the X-Men with Inhumans. Designed as a signature nemesis, he acted as a self-appointed judge for new Inhumans. Marvel elevated him aggressively, featuring him in major marketing and fast-tracking him into the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. TV series. However, readers completely rejected him. He was viewed as a generic big brute with a vague ideology, lacking the charisma of Magneto or the personal menace of Sabretooth. He ultimately became a despised symbol of the forced Inhuman initiative that fans were already resisting. The drop-off was absolute. Once Marvel regained the X-Men film rights, the Inhuman push ceased, and Lash vanished, barely appearing since 2017. His failure was structural. He was a product of corporate mandate rather than storytelling necessity, doomed to irrelevance once the marketing strategy shifted. At number 7 is Regent, the villain who beat every Avenger. Created by Dan Slott in Amazing Spider-Man, Renew Your Vows in 2015, and imported to the main universe in 2016, Regent was designed as an instant level 100 threat. Augustus Roman wore a suit allowing him to absorb and utilize the powers of every superhero he captured. Marvel elevated him aggressively. In his alternate reality debut, he had already defeated the Avengers, X-Men, and Fantastic Four. In the main continuity, he immediately required a high-stakes Spider-Man and Iron Man team-up. However, readers rejected him as a stat-block villain, defined solely by his absurd power level rather than any compelling personality. His design was a generic guy in armor, and his motivation to imprison heroes for protection felt like a tired trope. After his initial arc, he was imprisoned and ignored by future writers. Regent failed due to structural power creep. He was too overpowered to be a recurring rogue, yet too uninteresting to anchor a major event. Next, the mastermind who secretly controlled the Fantastic Four, Thanos' failed heir, and the demon who rewrote Nightcrawler's origin. 3 retcons fans never accepted. At number 6 is the Quiet Man, the secret architect of the Fantastic Four. Introduced by James Robinson in Fantastic Four in 2014, the Quiet Man was revealed as the secret mastermind behind the team's entire history. Marvel positioned him as an omniscient figure who had manipulated events from the shadows since the Fantastic Four's origin. He was elevated through a systematic dismantling of the team, ruining their reputation, turning the public against them, and evicting them from the Baxter Building. However, the execution collapsed upon the reveal of his identity. John Eden, a man motivated by a petty college crush on Sue Storm. Fans ridiculed the disconnect between his godlike influence and his soap opera motivation, feeling the retcon insulted classic continuity by stripping agency from iconic villains. Following the run's cancellation, the character was completely abandoned, receiving no mention during the team's 2018 revival. The structural failure was unearned gravitas. A new creation cannot simply claim to be more integral than Doctor Doom without earning that weight through years of storytelling. At number 5 is Thane, the son of Thanos. Introduced during Jonathan Hickman's Infinity event in 2013, Thane was Marvel's attempt to establish a new heavy hitter in the cosmic hierarchy. As the biological son of Thanos capable of trapping victims in living death, he was instantly central to the publisher's biggest storylines. His elevation continued in the 2016 Thanos solo series, where he became a host for the Phoenix Force, attaining godhood to rival his father. Despite this massive push, readers rejected him. Unlike the stoic, terrifying menace of Thanos, Thane appeared whiny and indecisive. His visual design, often just a generic purple alien, lacked distinction, and his defining motivation of hating his father felt derivative and repetitive. His decline was final. At the arc's conclusion, he was depowered and cast into the God Quarry, effectively a black hole, where he remains today. Thane's failure was structural. Being Thanos' son is merely a hook, not a character, and he never evolved beyond the shadow of his lineage. At number 4 is Azazel, the real father of Nightcrawler. Introduced by Chuck Austen in Uncanny X-Men in 2003, Azazel was revealed as an ancient biblical demon and Nightcrawler's fake father. Marvel intended him to lead a new faction of teleporting mutants, positioning him as the central antagonist of the Draco. This arc rewrote Nightcrawler's origin, portraying Azazel as an immortal master swordsman commanding a literal demon army. However, the launch was a disaster. The Draco is widely considered one of the worst X-Men stories ever. Fans hated the revelation that Nightcrawler's appearance wasn't an ironic genetic mutation, but the result of being half-demon. Azazel felt cheesy and tonally inconsistent with the franchise's sci-fi roots. Writers ignored him for nearly a decade afterward. Although he reappeared later due to brand synergy with the X-Men, first-class film, he was demoted to a background grunt. His failure was a structural genre clash. Injecting literal biblical fantasy into a genetic sci-fi series broke the reader's suspension of disbelief. Now the collapse accelerates. A monster built to rival Doomsday, a magic god-killer meant to redefine Doctor Strange, and a mystery villain whose reveal destroyed years of build-up. At number 3 is Freak, Spider-Man's Doomsday. Introduced during the Brand New Day era in 2008 by Bob Gale and Phil Jimenez, Freak was designed to be Spider-Man's personal Doomsday. Originating as an addict who mutated into an adaptive monstrosity, he possessed the terrified power to resurrect and become immune to whatever killed him previously. Marvel elevated him as the first significant new threat of the franchise's soft reboot, emphasizing that Peter Parker was physically outmatched and genuinely fearful of him. Despite this push, readers found the character flat. His visual design, a lanky, skinless creature, was grotesque but unmemorable. Crucially, he lacked a compelling human alter ego, making him feel like a monster of the week rather than a true nemesis. After a handful of appearances between 2008 and 2010, he completely vanished from continuity. Freak's failure was structural. Spider-Man's most iconic rogues, like Green Goblin or Dr. Octopus, rely on deep personal connections to Peter Parker. Freak was merely a beast without a soul, offering no emotional stakes to support his physical threat. At number 2 is the Imperator, the God Butcher of Magic. Created by Jason Aaron and Doctor Strange in 2015, the Imperator led the Empirical, a fanatical, science-worshipping army traveling the multiverse to execute Sorcerer Supremes. Marvel clearly intended him to be to Doctor Strange what Aaron's Gore the God Butcher was to Thor, a terrifying, deconstructive force. The elevation was massive. In his debut arc, he successfully destroyed nearly all magic in the Marvel Universe, stripped Strange of his sorcery, and forced the heroes to resort to physical weapons. However, readers largely rejected the character, criticizing him as a derivative Gore ripoff without the tragic depth. His core conflict of science versus magic felt flat in a shared universe where Iron Man and Thor have long coexisted. Once defeated, the Imperator was swept off the board, magic was quickly restored, and the consequences were ignored by subsequent writers. His failure was structural. Aaron attempted to replicate his specific Thor formula, but the repetition yielded diminishing returns. At number 1 is Kindred, the Harry Osborn mystery box. Introduced by Nick Spencer in Amazing Spider-Man issue 1 in 2018, Kindred was a bandaged demon lord who taunted Peter Parker for 3 years, claiming knowledge of his greatest sin: one more day. As the big bad of a massive 70-plus issue run, he was elevated through major feats like resurrecting characters, possessing heroes, and killing Peter repeatedly in dreamscapes. However, the audience rejection was severe. The mystery dragged on far too long, and by the time Kindred was revealed as a convoluted construct of Harry Osborn involving clones, AI, and demons, fans were exhausted. The resolution relied on a messy retcon involving Mephisto that confused more than it satisfied. The drop-off was immediate. Once Spencer's run ended in 2021, the character was effectively erased as the Harry soul was freed. However, Kindred wasn't just Harry, but a complex entity involving the Stacy twins, Sarah and Gabriel, and an AI version of Harry Osborn. Kindred's failure was structural, mystery box fatigue. The buildup was so immense that no answer could satisfy the audience, ensuring the villain would never return. Comment down below with your thoughts on the video, and press the subscribe button and bell icon for regular updates.